Hey guy, welcome back to our channel. So how you doing all? Hope you all doing great. So in this video we are gonna see what if Naruto was Sage of a bygone era mode on Naruto X Era full movie, and this is part 1, and if you want more then make sure to hit that like button, share and subscribe and make sure press bell icon for latest updates. Let's get in the video. The sound of rapid footsteps was heard throughout the halls of a massive old-fashioned traditional Japanese mansion. Rounding the corner of a hall was a rather odd individual. The individual was breathing heavily while running down the hall. He was a rather portly older man with grey hair and a beard. He was clearly in the later years of his life, with even the fox ears and 7 tails coming out of his tailbone being grey in color due to age. Reaching the end of a large elaborate hall, he stumbled into the closed doors, pushing them open and almost tumbling over his own feet and falling to the ground. Lady Huff Huff Yusaka. Huff Huff. Inside the room, 3 younger individuals sat, 2 on one side of the desk and 1 on the other. Sitting on the left was a young-looking black-haired girl with pink eyes and significantly large assets. She was seated with her body leaning forward and her hands in her lap with an excited but still confused look on her face, wearing a fancy and expensive women's business suit. This was Seraphol Leviathan, formerly Citri, one of the 4 Devil Kings. On the right was a young-looking man with crimson red hair and blue-green eyes, wearing an opulent men's suit and leaning back in his chair, trying to look casual while his crimson eyebrow rose. This was Surzich's Lucifer, formerly Gremory, another one of the 4 great Satans. Sitting on the other side of the desk was a regal and beautiful woman with long blonde hair done up in a fancy ponytail, golden eyes, and even larger assets. Unlike the other 2 occupants who appeared human, this woman possessed golden fox ears and 9 fluffy fox tails that waved behind her body. She wore a fancy shrine maiden outfit in yellow, with a black and yellow skull-covered shawl wrap over her arms. This was Yusaka, a Kyuubi Yakai and current leader of the Yakai faction and close friend to the Shinto pantheon. Currently, her clipped royal eyebrow twitched as her face struggled between anger and exasperation at the intrusion, especially in front of 2 representatives of an outside faction. What is the meaning of this interruption, Grengu-san? The now named Grengu took a few deep breaths and straightened his posture after taking in the 2 other individuals in the room. I apologize for the interruption, Yusaka-sama and guests, he said with slight venom in his voice aimed at the devils. The outer barrier surrounding Shukaku-sama's temple has been breached, my lady. The 2 devils glanced at each other confused, while Yusaka gasped before she stood with her eyes blowing wide before hardening. What? How? Yusaka yelled in an almost frantic tone, shocking the devils while releasing a significant amount of power. My lady. The barrier was breached. We believe we have a traitor. A 3 tails named Mizuki hasn't shown up to his position recently and has been reportedly acting strange recently. Yusaka slammed her hands down on her desk while continuing to release a large amount of power, surprising the devils with its potency. Find him, and if he did betray us, kill him immediately. The devils again looked at each other in shock. Get some of our forces to the temple immediately and get into contact with Amaterasu-sama. Do we know who breached the barrier? Or what they are planning? The 2 devils looked at each other awkwardly, realizing they essentially had been forgotten. Yusaka-sama, a team we already sent, hasn't responded. I fear they are most likely dead, but we do know that it is a group of fallen angels. With what reports we have indicated at least 3 7-wing fallen, and a large number of other various fallen and even some humans possibly with sacred gears. Grengu lowered his head throughout his response, feeling ashamed for his failure in his duty of protecting the temple. Damn it. Surzich's Dono, Seraphol Dono, the 2 devils sat up straighter slightly after being addressed by a furious-looking Kyuubi. You wish to have permission to rent the territory of Kuo. If you should come with me now and repel these fallen and sacred gear users from my land, I will relent and allow your sisters to manage the territory. You will also sign a deal to never reveal the information that you will discover regarding the temple. If you prove to be trustworthy, I shall consider an alliance with your faction even after the massacre committed by your faction. The 2 Devil Kings perked up significantly at her words, gaining, at least temporary control of the territory of Kuo for their sisters, plus a potential alliance was significantly better than what they expected from this meeting. They expected to get turned down hard due to the almost hostile relations between devils and Yakai after the devils' massacre of the Nekashu and other various Nekomata that lived in the underworld. Fighting fallen angels was risky with the tense peace between factions. However, they could claim that they were assisting their new ally in dealing with fallen who breached a barrier around some apparent special Yakai temple that they had never heard of if questioned, which should stave off any backlash, since what the fallen were doing could be seen as an extreme violation of Yakai territory. Even though the fallen probably wouldn't care about doing something bad given their less than trustworthy and honorable reputation. Surzich's and Seraphol looked at each other for a moment before nodding to each other. Very well, Yusaka Dono, we will assist you with these fallen and possible sacred gear users, but we would like to know more about this temple that was apparently breached. Yusaka signed before lowering her shoulders slightly before nodding and walking around her desk. Very well, it will take us some time to get to the teleportation circle that will take us there anyway, follow me please. The devils obliged but grew confused, couldn't they just teleport from where they were? Seraphol voiced their question while following the Kyuubi. The temple is protected by many barriers, more than just the simple field barrier that was broken by the fallen angels. It is completely impossible to teleport into, out of, or near the temple without using a special ancient teleportation circle located deep in this compound, with the circle itself being heavily warded as well. Yusaka spoke much to their surprise. Anti-teleportation barriers were rare and very difficult to create, with their fellow Satan Ajuka complaining numerous times about how difficult it was to create them for the devil raiding game arenas. As for information about the temple itself, you should know it is not the only one, Yusaka spoke reluctantly, trusting the devils with information hidden by the Yakai faction and her ancestors specifically for generations. What do you mean I have never heard of any hidden Yakai temples? Surziches let his surprise leak into his voice. That is the point of them being hidden. My ancestors and the Yakai faction have hidden the existence of these temples for generations. It was some of the very first members of my family who first figured out how to link themselves to the Li lines. When they did they felt odd signatures scattered far across the world. When they tracked them and traveled to the locations they found areas that were absolutely covered in protective barriers and other symbols that we believe to be other types of protection, but are too advanced even for our best. Yusaka briefly paused her words, remembering the journals and even stone tablets left behind by her ancestors. At first, they could not even approach, with the barriers blocking them and hiding their view of what was behind them. Eventually, they figured out how to send some chakra into the barriers, and the barriers let them in without any resistance. Apparently, according to the records, it almost felt like the barriers were pleased with the chakra that was sent through it. They traveled to all of the locations where they felt a disturbance and discovered the teleportation circle here in Kyoto and 10 temples spread throughout the world. Seraphol and Surziches listened to the story with all of their attention, intrigued and shocked at the story. I'm just going to say it, the temples make no sense, Yusaka sighed while unlocking another sealed door. What do you mean Yusaka don't know? Seraphol asked while looking around at the old and mosaic-covered hallway they were now walking through. The temples are old, ancient really, from what we have been able to find out through writing found in the temples, and even through modern scientific age determination techniques, the temples and even the teleportation circle are far older than any Yakai, and even older than any other human or supernatural that we have knowledge of throughout history. Seraphol and Surziches looked at the beautiful Kyuubi with their mouths gaping. Yes, that's about the response I gave when my father told me about the temples. It doesn't make sense, but centuries of investigation all point to the temples, barriers, and teleportation circle, everything being far older than anything else on the planet, perhaps older than the biblical God and office themselves. The devils gaped. Any member of the church would call blasphemy, but many high-ranking supernatural beings knew that the biblical God didn't actually create the universe. He did create many things including humans, but not the universe itself, so it was possible, but extremely unlikely, for these temples to exist on Earth before even God or office, who appeared to be around the same age as God. Came to be. You don't have to believe me, but that is what all the evidence we have gathered shows. Anyway, there is the teleportation circle here in Kyoto. The first 9 are themed, and we assume they are meant to be honoring who they were created for. Each temple is dedicated to one individual, or in reality I should say one Yakai, or at least something close to being a Yakai. The temple that was breached was the first discovered. It is dedicated from what we have learned to Shukaku, the one-tailed tanuki. The second is dedicated to Matatabi, the two-tailed cat or Bakaneko, the third to Isobu, the three-tailed tortoise shrimper Yumabozu, fourth to Son Goku, the four-tailed monkey, the fifth to Koku, the five-tailed horse whaler Sagari Kujira, sixth to Seiken, the six-tailed slug, the seventh to Chimay, the seven-tailed rhinoceros beetle, eighth to Jayuki, the eight-tailed octopus Oxarushi, and the ninth to Karama, the nine-tailed fox. Each temple even houses a massive statue depicting them in what we assume to be life-size, with Karama being the largest and almost 4 times the size of even myself in my fox form, and around 3 times the size of Inari-sama in her fox form. The two devils almost tripped over their feet at that comment, since the temples must be truly massive if they could hold statues that large. The 10th temple is different, it's still the same massive size as the other temples, but it doesn't have a massive statue inside it. Unfortunately, it's the one we know the least about too, since it doesn't have anything to let us know who it is dedicated to. All we really know about the 10th temple is that it has a small statue at the back of the temple on top of a throne. It depicts someone who almost looks human. The only thing making it look different from a human sitting on a throne is the 2 horns jutting out of his head, whisker marks on his cheeks, and a strange third eye in the middle of his forehead. Isaka blushed slightly thinking about the first time she saw the statue when she was young. She still remembered how embarrassed she was when her parents and Amaterasu-sama took her there for the first time and caught her frozen in place with her tails drooping down behind her and a line of drool falling from her open mouth. The teasing she had to suffer due to her young hormonal crush on the statue man still haunted her to this day. He is quite handsome looking though, Yusaka mumbled and was happy that the devil envoys were behind her and unable to see the red shine of her cheeks. Stopping in front of what appeared to be a dead end, the two devils watched as Yusaka sent a visible stream of chakra down her arm to the palm of her hand. The blank wall ahead of them shimmered before an elaborate seal appeared centered around a large spiral. Placing her chakra-laden palm in front of the spiral, the yokai leader twisted her hand to the left and took a step back as a thrum, akin to a deep belch rung in the space around them. The spiral slowly unraveled, twisting in a counterclockwise motion before the seal shimmered out of sight. Like a dark fog fading from their sight, the previously blank hallway dead end vanished and a dim light illuminated an earthen staircase leading them below ground. There, I have disabled the barriers. This is the entrance that will lead us to the teleportation seal. Walking down the uneven natural staircase, Yusaka lit a ball of foxfire above her hand to cast more light in the dark space, which somehow appeared quite dark to even the enhanced night vision of the Devil Kings. Ooh. For being just an old staircase, this place is pretty spooky. I can barely see a thing. This is giving me so many ideas for my Miracle Leviathan show. Ancient ruins with anti-magical girl traps. Maybe the big baddie will trap Leviathan and use her body to sate his long pent-up desires before Leviathan manages to escape and claim the powerful relic and slay the villain. Skipping down the staircase with her large breasts bouncing up and down, Seraphil easily ignored the deadpan look that her fellow Satan sent her and the slight choking cough that the Kyuubi in front of her released. Reaching the end of the staircase, the group stopped before a large cavern, lit by glowing blue ethereal torches, spread around the near-perfect circular space. The room was near empty, with the vast majority of the room being taken up solely by a massive seal inlet on the floor and even wrapping up the walls. The seal script was well beyond anything that Surziches or Seraphil had ever seen, with a near mosaic of interconnected lines flowing in elegant patterns on the perimeter. Large kanji from 1 to 10 surrounded the seal like the numbers of a clock, and the center was once again a swirl, which appeared to be slowly moving in a clockwise rotation. Stepping forward, Yusaka crouched near the kanji for 1 and let her chakra flow into it, alighting the symbol in a blue glow. This is the teleportation seal. I've configured it to take us right outside the temple so that we can catch the intruders from behind. Wishing that Ijuka had been here to examine the seal, Surziches attempted to take in as much information as he could while observing the yokai leader's work. Just because he agreed to keep all the information that the kitsune was sharing a secret didn't mean cold memorize it for potential use in the future. Attacking from behind is a decent plan, but why not simply teleport inside the temple and use the existing barriers and defenses to strike from the more fortified location? Isaka traced numerous lines of the seal, focusing on her efforts. Normally you probably would want to use a fortified location's defenses to your advantage in such a way, however, the layers of barriers don't just keep people out, they keep people in as well. Without disabling the remaining barriers, we would not be able to exit the temple. And disabling the interior barriers would allow the intruders clear access into the temple. It is possible that by the time we get there, that it may be already too late and my worries could be for naught. However, I still abhor the idea of these fallen stepping foot in the sacred temple, so I will not be the one to give them free entry by lowering the defenses. Surziches would have questioned the need for a barrier that kept things inside the temple, but was stopped when Yusaka stood from her crouch, the glow surrounding the room growing brighter, almost pulsing. The group watched as the seal shifted and changed itself fluidly, lines and curves bending and breaking. The kanji for 1 continued to glow, while the rest of the surrounding numbers faded from view. The seal continued to shift until the lines changed to form a walkway that lifted itself from the ground, leading from the 1 kanji straight to the center of the swirl. The swirl itself began to spin faster, almost like a whirlpool. The torches illuminating the room released 1 large pulse before dimming, with a visible shockwave emanating from each torch and reaching the center of the room. "Follow me." Yusaka took a step up onto the elevated pathway that had formed over the seal before she began walking toward the center. Following her, Surziches and Seraphil watched as the swirl crumbled in on itself, the floor underneath its former location collapsing downwards as if it was being ground in a blender. Reaching the end of the pathway and looking over the edge, they peered down at the space beneath them in amazement. There was no longer a floor in the center of the room, only a descending twister of energy. "It may look imposing, but it is safe, just follow me." Before the two devils could ask what she meant, Yusaka shocked them by jumping off the end of the platform directly into the vortex, vanishing. Magical girl Leviathan thinks you should go first Zetch's tan. With a swift push, Seraphil giggled as her fellow Satan let out a girly scream before falling into the swirling void. Summoning her magical girl outfit and staff, Seraphil spun around and posed for an imaginary camera before diving in, excited to find more adventures and ideas she could include in her show. Temple of Shukaku outskirts. Hopping out of a circular portal in the shape of a swirl of energy, 3 figures landed back on solid ground. The first, Yusaka, landed gracefully, having long since become accustomed to the seal's strange teleportation. Appearing shortly after the Kyuubi, the 2 devils landed less gracefully. Seraphil stumbled for a moment before righting herself and posing with her tongue stuck out of the corner of her mouth and hand forming a peace sign in front of her face. Surzich's had the most ungraceful landing of the 3, coming out of his unexpected tumble through the portal. The Crimson Satan landed face first with a groan. After quickly righting himself, trying to save his dignity in front of the silently giggling yokai, he sent Seraphil a brief pouty glare before looking around at the new location where they found themselves. Is this a desert? Ugh, no wonder why I taste sand. Grumbling quietly to himself, he brushed some sand from his face. Yes, the Saharan desert to be precise. Shukaku-sama's temple sits in the perfect geological center of the Sahara. Walking forward, Yusaka explained more about the temple to the devils. It does make sense that Shukaku-sama's temple is here. Based on everything we know, Lord Shukaku was a powerful one-tailed tanuki with the power to control sand to a very high degree. Continuing to walk forward, Yusaka suddenly ran ahead when she noticed blood in the sand. Coming over a small sand dune, revealed a view of the missing yokai warriors sent to defend it from the intruders. A group of yokai warriors lay on the sandy ground in various positions, clear signs of a fight, light weapon burns, and blood marked the area around them. Crouching down to check on the closest body, a wolf yokai, she sent a pulse of chakra through his body to check his condition. Lowering her head, Yusaka said a quick prayer for the yokai warriors. They were dead. The whole squad that was sent to investigate the breach had been cut down by the fallen angels and their human allies. Surzich's was crouched a few feet away looking at the body of a human wearing church priest clothes, most likely a former member of the church that was either excommunicated or left to follow the fallen faction. Yusaka don't know. There are a couple of fallen angel and human bodies around the area. I apologize for the loss of your people, however, they did not go down without a fight. Their sacrifice should be honored and you should not let it be in vain. Nodding her head, the buxom blonde stood and quickly cast a basic preservation seal on the deceased warriors so that their bodies could be retrieved and returned to their families. Stealing her gaze and tossing her shell to the wind, Yusaka began to walk over the next sand dune. As the devils made to follow her to the temple, the group froze as a deafeningly loud sound similar to that of shattering glass echoed off of the land around them. Looking ahead, the group could see large, nearly transparent shards falling from the sky. The pieces fizzled out of existence, revealing a massive structure that was unseen moments before. Gasp, that was, they've broken through the inner barriers. But how? We must get there quickly. Yusaka rushed forward with Seraphil and Surzich's close behind. Each member of the group zeroed in on a group of fallen angels, humans, and 1 kitsune yokai moving toward the entrance to the temple. As the group of 1 yokai and 2 devils got closer, it became clear that their arrival was not missed by the fallen angel leaders, who quickly had their lower-ranking fighters stay behind while they flew into the temple's entrance, with the 3 tails kitsune following them on foot. Flying in the back of the fallen angel group was a female fallen with 6 wings, the strongest of the remaining intruders. The 6-winged fallen was a relatively short, fair-skinned woman with brown eyes and long, untamed dark pink hair, framing her face with a strip traveling down the middle of her forehead. Wearing a black shirt and shorts under a tan tunic, the fallen looked rather plainly dressed compared to many of the other warriors near her. Oddly, she also wore a black cap on top of her head and a large purple rope-like inverted bow around her waist. She held an impassive, if not grumpy, look on her face as she stared down at the incoming threat that she was ordered to stay behind and eliminate. Alright, you shitheads. Let's kill these fuckers and get on with raiding this shitty place. Got it, peons. Lord Kakabiel doesn't want anyone getting in our way. One of the low-ranking fodder fallen that stood waiting on the incoming foes suddenly began to shake as he recognized the 3 heading towards them. Lady Taiya. Isn't it the Kyuubi yokai Yusaka, and what are they doing here? It's the Satans Leviathan and Lucifer. The corrupted angel's words were heard by nearly all of the fighters standing in front of the temple. Even the freshest recruit among them knew of the 3 supernaturals and the stories of their power. Oh shit. We are no match for them. I didn't sign up to fight a Satan, let alone 2. Lady Taiya. What do we do? The group of fallen and humans began panicking, knowing that they were absolutely no match for the 3. Taiya herself began to sweat. Despite having 6 wings and being a higher-ranking member of their operation cell, she wasn't as strong as a Satan. They were fucked. Why were devils here alongside the yokai faction leader? The devil faction had a piss-poor relationship with the yokai after the Nekashu massacre. The devils and Kyuubi shouldn't be here. Lord Kakabiel had assured them that, with the help of the Three Tails Mizuki, they would be in and out of the hidden temple before anyone knew any better. First that squad of Yokai warriors, and now this. Lord Kakabiel wouldn't have lied to them, would he? Knowing the types of punishments that the warmongering cadre levied against those that disappointed him, Taya knew that she needed to rally the forces, and at least they could maybe hold off the devils and Yokai until the others could retrieve whatever relics or weapons that were kept here. It had to be something strong with all the secrecy and barriers surrounding it. They could use it to kill both the Pink and Crimson Satan, and the Kyuubi Yokai. Lord Kakabiel would have to be pleased with that. I don't care who they are or if all of you have to die, you will kill this trash. Your punishment for cowardice and disobeying my orders will feel like absolute hell compared to anything these demons could do to you. Do your jobs and take them out. Forming a spear of corrupted light in her hand, Taya flung the weapon at the group of three. Unfortunately for Taya and the other temple robbers that were left to guard the entrance, they didn't get much of a chance to even fight. Isaka, for the first time since she was alerted to the breach of the temple barrier, took a moment to consider the situation. Rubbing the back of her neck a little sheepishly, she realized that maybe she didn't need to bring along Surziches and Seraphol. She had told outsiders a secret of the Yokai faction that had been kept hidden for centuries, and these were the types of enemies that had managed to break through the barrier and stood in her way. She had expected much stronger enemies, believing the scouting report info that they had received to be inaccurate. Perhaps only the stronger Eight-Wing Fallen would have even a chance to scratch her, and even then it was unlikely. How they had been able to breach the outer barrier, let alone the inner barriers, was absurd. The fight, if you could call it that, against the entrance guards had only lasted a few seconds. Seraphol summoned a Citri magic crest from the tip of her staff and unleashed a massive wave of ice that instantly froze a large number of the enemy solid, leaving behind a completely out-of-place glacier in the middle of the desert. Surziches displayed why he was known as the Crimson-Haired Prince of Destruction by obliterating another large portion of the fallen and human numbers with his power of destruction abilities. Not even dust remained of the intruders targeted by his attack. Isaka herself had eliminated the last large grouping of Grigori forces, with her Foxfire incinerating the remaining opponents with an ease that made her blink. Foxfire was powerful, especially when used by a Kyuubi connected to the Lee lines, but her attack had seemed much more potent than usual. Motherfucker. Ah, that hurt. You shitty demons, how dare you stand in our way. With the smoke and dust of their attacks clearing the six-wing fallen, Taya hovered unevenly in front of them. She was evidently stronger than the simple fodder had been eliminated but had not escaped the attacks unscathed. Her clothing was burned and falling apart in some areas, and two of her wings were scorched hanging limply behind her. Taya herself was furious as well as frustrated with her own weakness. She was only a six-wing fallen angel, considered in the mid-tier of power among the Grigori ranks. She had always desired power and to be recognized, and this mission was what she believed would grant her both of her dreams. She didn't want to die here, she called. Reaching up to the top of her scalp, Taya grabbed what was left of her cap and took it off of her head. Flipping it upside down, she reached inside before pulling out her last remaining option other than running away. She laughed before stabbing a small piece of metal that was shaped and carved to look like a flute into the center of her chest. Immediately afterward, dark power began to roll off of her body as it began to change form. The power was so beautiful, but the pleasure of the renewed strength surging through her veins did not last long as intense pain and a feeling of pure wrongness flooded her. Her skin began to turn a shade of brown, her eyes turning a sick yellow with black sclery with black lines appearing under her eyes. Her hair lengthened and became wilder, and bone-white horns burst out of her skull. Sucking in a large breath of air, all of her pains faded away and an almost euphoric feeling surged through her body. Ha 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 ha. Now, this is more like it. This power, it feels incredible. Why were Valper and his creepy assistant Kabuto so wary to create these cursed seals? I feel like I could take on all of those stuck-up bastards in heaven. This is what I deserved from the start. Ha ha ha. Looking towards the shocked devils and Kitsune, an insane grin formed on her face showing off the girl's new dagger-like teeth. I am going to kill you all. Ha ha ha. The group of two devils and one Kitsune stared at their opponent's new form. Concern and wariness were apparent on each of their faces. Not only had her appearance changed, but so had her power. Sensing her energy signature revealed that it had skyrocketed from what it once was and was now nearing that of a low ultimate class being. The go from a relatively low mid-range power level to what would be considered quite high on the scale in a second was absurd. Possibly even more concerning, however, was the fact that the feel of her energy itself had changed. Gone was the slightly murky and corrupted nature one would expect from a fallen angel, and in its place was the feel of something darker than even the most heinously evil devil. It was tainted with an almost sickening feeling intertwining itself through every pore of the fallen's body and even leaking into the air around her as a black miasma. This turn of events was concerning. If these cursed seals were something given to all members of the Grigori, it would completely change the landscape of the faction's power balance. It could very well be the one domino that knocks over the rest in the fragile peace that the world held. The mention of Valper, who the two Devils Kings knew had to be the excommunicated priest Valper Galilei, who was the head researcher of the Holy Sword Project and conducted sick experiments on many children, brought up even more cause for concern. Serziches knew his sister's knight Kibayudo had been subjected to the horrors of Valper's experiments and held a burning hatred toward the man and the holy swords themselves. To discover that the genocide bishop had seemingly joined the Grigori and was even now working on even more dark projects was very worrying. A surge of energy drew the group from their thoughts as the fallen angel drew her arm back and summoned a spear of light. The weapon of choice for nearly all fallen looked much different than its normal appearance. Jagged edges and crackling bolts of dirty gray light streaked down the shaft of the weapon. The core appeared as a deep black abyss, emitting the foul shroud around it. Serziches dove out of the way with his wings manifesting behind him as he took to the sky, right before the spear slammed into the ground that he previously stood upon. The speed of the projectile was significantly faster than her previous throw, and when it struck the ground instead of simply piercing into the sand, it detonated in a large blast of near black light that turned the coarse grains of the desert into an inky glass crater. Dodging the spear was still quite easy for the crimson-haired devil, however. It seemed like more than just her power level was increased by the dark seal. Another pulse of power radiated from the dark-winged fallen, who released a dark laugh as all around her numerous spears came to life before being launched down from her position. Serziches and Serafrul used their wings to dodge the first wave of the sloppy barrage with little difficulty, while Yusaka, who lacked the capability of flight, channeled her Taki to disperse and block the attacks that were about to strike her. Beginning to channel their own magic, Serziches and Serafrul launched a combination attack, sending spheres made of the power of destruction and lances of ice at Teia. Dodging all but one of the attacks with enhanced speed, a shard of ice embedded itself in the thigh of the fallen, causing her to let out a yell of fury and pain. Any retort she could have made was silenced as a large fox paw swatted the raging woman out of the air. Isaka laughed lightly behind her once again humanoid palm as she watched the fallen slam into the glass-riddled sand. Swatting the corrupted girl out of the air like a fly caused her to impact the now hard glass surface, producing a satisfying crunchy sound. Once the dust cleared, Teia was visible, stumbling back to a standing position. Her form was worse for the wear, with scrapes and cuts marring her body. With furious eyes and a scream of demented and unhinged rage, a spear larger than a city bus formed over her head. The Devil Kings and Kitsune summoned magic circles to launch a counterattack. However, the spear of dark gray light didn't move. The fallen angel stood in place with a snarling visage on her face. However, dulled eyes betrayed her furious countenance. With a cough and a wet splatter, dark near black blood gushed out of the horned girl's mouth, coating her chin and gushing down into the cavity between her modest chest. Isaka, Serziches, and Serafrul still stood tense a few feet away, watching and wondering what was happening. Across Teia's face, veins became clear to see, zigzagging across her cheeks, the normally invisible pathways filled with pigment as black as night. The rest of her body soon became covered in a weave of ebony lines. The spear above her head shattered into nothingness, as with a spasm and a single quiet exhale of breath, the fallen angel's body fell to the ground, limp. Isaka, being the most adept sensor of the three, was the first to dissipate her magic circle, no longer sensing any signs of the girl's energy signature. She was dead. Serziches and Serafrul followed the Yokai leader to the body of the six-winged fallen angel. Crouching in front of the collapsed body, Serziches took note of the fallen's darker skin. Each vein appeared to bubble under the surface of her flesh. At many prominent junctions, the skin had actually burst, with fizzing thick black blood seeping out of the newly created holes. Her previous sickly yellow eyes, surrounded by black sclerae, were now filled with nothing but soulless Stygian ink. These cursed seals, whatever type of sick concoction was imbued into these power-ups, had to be looked into, found, and destroyed. It had twisted both the fallen's body and mind. It was undeniable that it had granted her increased power, speed, and strength, at least for a time. However, it was clear that this boost was carried by a pollutant toxin that ate away at the user until there was no life left inside of them. Standing from his crouch, Serziches cast his power of destruction on the fallen angel, Teia's body, erasing it from existence. We had better continue on, the temple is just ahead, and there are still more enemies to face. Agreeing, the group proceeded toward the temple, all three in a much more grim mood, as despite the girl being their enemy, the gruesome effects of the seal stuck in their mind. Abandoned church, outskirts of Osaka, Japan. Valper, you ensured that the Sound Four were given the cursed seals that you have been working on, correct? A bespectacled older man wearing the robes of a priest bowed his head towards a throne that was shrouded in darkness and shadow. Yes, of course, I gave them the cursed seals shortly before they departed to meet up with that Yakai Mizuki, as instructed. However, I must say that the research I have conducted on the shadow spirit, Mrim, is still in the early stages. The remnants of the creature's power that you had delivered to me were beyond the scope of anything that I have seen before. What little usable power I was able to extract and process is volatile, to say the least. There is a very good chance that if they use the cursed seals that they will die painfully. A dark chuckle rang from in the Veil of the Shadows. The treasures of an ancient Yakai temple would be useful, yes, yet it would not be a great loss if nothing is retrieved. This is the beginning of a mission that I have worked towards for centuries, riling up the Yakai faction, testing the limits of the cursed seals, and getting rid of bothersome and useless fodder. The Sound 4 will either return with the relics of the temple or die, it matters not to me. Bowing his head, the elder priest left the chamber to return to his research into the cursed seals derived from Mrim's energy and plan the retrieval of the Excalibur fragments. Crimson red eyes shone out from the curtain of shadows. Soon Azazel, the fragile peace you strive for and desire so much shall be broken. Kakabiel shall lead the fallen angels to war, victory, and dominion over all of our enemies. The three survivors of the desert brawl began their trek towards the sandy temple, all with concerned thoughts running through their heads. It appeared that at least right now these cursed seals were incomplete, however, they could even now pose a large threat to the balance of power and the shaky peace that currently existed, its ability to significantly increase the user's power, strength, and speed was something that if implemented in mass, could stun the other factions with a blitz attack. If it ever was to be completed and become a permanent boost, it would cause irreparable damage to the supernatural factions. Isaka Dono, there are a few things I wish to ask you before we get to the temple. The Crimson Devil King looked over at the Kyubi with a frown on his face. As long as we don't take too long I will of course answer them. The buxom blonde had an idea of what Surziches wanted to inquire about, you noticed did you? What's the deal? My super duper magical girl powers should have blown away that dusty crow and its lackeys. HMPH, Seraphol pouted in frustration and concern thinking back to her attacks which were not as strong as they should be and drained more of her power than usual. My powers did seem diminished, my reserves are also more drained than they normally would be. Surziches had also noticed the difference in his abilities. Yes, I should have warned you, I do apologize, in my rush I forgot. A small embarrassed blush formed on Yusaka's cheeks. Even though they have been studied for centuries now, there are many things that are still unknown and strange about the temples. We do know that unless you are connected to the Li lines, beings above a certain power level are greatly limited in and near the temples. Attacks are weaker, your body's lower, and your reserves drain faster. It affects everyone, but only those of significant power actually realize that they are affected by it. I forgot, speaking of the Li lines, how is it that you are able to come here right now, Yusaka Dono? You are connected to the power of the Li lines. I was always under the assumption that a Kyubi had to maintain them, and you were unable to leave Kyoto, the Lucifer Mouse spoke as the group crossed over a sand dune. Normally you would be right, most supernatural know that Kyoto is considered the hub of the Li lines, however, that is not exactly the case. The Li lines do travel through Kyoto, but the network also crosses through the earth and runs directly under each of the temples, with a sort of hotspot collecting at each one. The blonde fox wasn't particularly happy to be sharing this info with the two devils, but she had already spilled a large number of Yakai secrets, and she owed them considering they were helping her with what could be considered a Yakai problem. We do not know for sure, but my grandfather believed that the temples are what actually gives power to the Li lines, so because of that, through the special teleportation seal, I am able to travel between each of the temples and Kyoto without being disconnected from the Li lines. Surziches and Seraphol were both surprised and continued to wonder what other secrets the ancient temples hid. It's odd, I've never had to fight at the temples before, but my attacks seemed more powerful than normal. Now that I focus more, it almost seems as if the temple Li line is feeding me more power. I've never noticed that before. Yusaka's spoken thoughts were brought to a halt by her companions who had stopped walking alongside her. As they reached the entrance to the temple, Surziches and Seraphol couldn't help but stare. The ancient structure had appeared large from a distance, but standing in its entryway revealed its true size to be even larger than they had thought it was. The large gateway towered over their heads, and even massive creatures such as dragons would have no trouble fitting through it. Unlike what they were expecting, however, the temple itself was rather simple in design, almost bland. Its massive walls appeared to be made out of nothing more than the sand that surrounded them, with pale blue lines crisscrossing the structure. Overall, other than its eyes, it was quite underwhelming. Especially when compared to the lavish lifestyles that many supernatural beings were accustomed to. It's certainly big, but magical girl Leviathan was kinda expecting it to be fancier. This just won't do. It should be made of gold. The audience would be so shocked and envious of the pure extravagance and how shiny it is that they would be jealous of me and want to go on their own magical girl-themed adventures. Ooh, why didn't I think of that before? Magical Girl Leviathan's Adventure Theme Park. As the bubbly Leviathan began following them excitedly mumbling to herself about opening a theme park in the underworld, Surziches and Yasaka rolled their eyes before starting a conversation of their own. Despite a lot of that, I do have to agree with her when you said these were secret ancient yokai temples, and with all of the security I kinda expected the temple to be grander, it kinda just looks like a giant sand castle, no offense. Surziches sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck, hoping he didn't offend the beautiful Kyubi. I said they were large and ancient secret temples, I never said they were extravagant, no offense taken, they really aren't what you would consider impressive in their design, none of the temples are dressed up in gold or jewels, Yasaka gestured to the temple wall. As far as we can guess the temples are simply built to represent the powers or personality of who they were constructed for, based on everything we have learned over the years, despite how little that may be, points to Lord Shukaku being heavily aligned with sand, so their temple is made out of sand to acknowledge that and honor it. Another example. We believe Lord Son Goku had the ability to wield lava, so their temple is inside a volcano. Surziches listened with intrigue as they grew ever nearer to the temple entrance. The devils and yokai stopped their conversation and each adopted their serious battle-ready disposition once again as they heard shouting coming from inside the temple. We can talk more later, if possible. I would like to capture the Three Tails traitor, Mizuki, to question him regarding any other details he may have spilled. Let's go. Nodding to one another, the three quickly headed into the dimly lit temple. Temple interior a few moments prior. Damn it, you've got to be kidding me. There's nothing here other than this dumb giant raccoon statue, a rather androgynous looking male with fair skin and light blue-gray straight hair that covered his right eye growled in frustration. The fallen angel was wearing a brown tunic, black shorts, and black arm warmers, which were clearly not needed in the desert. He had a large rope-like belt tied in an inverted bow around his waist and a red beaded necklace around his neck, currently displaying his frustration. His green lipstick-covered lips were tugged into an angry frown as he looked around the large chamber. I believe it's a tanuki. Adding his comment was a taller dark-skinned man with shaggy black hair tied into a ponytail. He bore a condescending smirk on his face as his black eyes observed the clear frustration in the other fallen. He wore similar clothing with a sleeveless gray tunic and black shorts, plus the same rope bow on his waist. Shut up, Kidomaru. You actually think I give a fuck what it is? With his blue-gray hair covering his right eye, the frustrated former angel glared at his comrade Kidomaru. That's enough, Seiken. The third fallen angel attempted to break up any potential argument that could hinder their mission. He shared a strikingly similar appearance to the fair-skinned eight-winged fallen angel. He too wore the inverted bow rope and a brown tunic. It was obvious looking at him that he was a twin with the same androgynous appearance and light blue-gray hair covering his left eye instead of the right. No, it's not enough, Yukin. Glaring at his brother, Seiken turned away and moved towards the yokai that was with him. Hey, you stupid fox. What's the big deal? Where is the fucking treasure? The weapons. Artifacts. There's nothing here. Standing slightly separated from the group of fallen angels was a three-tailed kitsune with green eyes and shoulder-length whitish blue hair that matched his tails and ears. He wore a blue bandana on his head and a gray tunic and pants. He held an angry and ego-filled look on his face as he held his chest puffed into the air. How dare you refer to me in such a way? I have the protection of Lord Kakabiel himself. I am destined to be his right-hand man, as befitting someone like me. You can't. The fact that you actually believe I care and that you think you have what it takes to be Lord Kakabiel's right hand is hilarious as it is ridiculous. Lord Kakabiel isn't here right now. It would be a real shame if you happened to die while we search this crappy desert. You were supposed to be our ticket into this place and guide us to all of the weapons and loot. Yet I don't see anything here other than sand, and more sand. The furious fallen angel was nearly snarling as he approached the kitsune. TCH, I have no damn clue. This place was supposed to be super important and have a bunch of valuables. This temple was hidden under so much secrecy, it took me forever to even find out about it. You know how difficult it was to break into that bitch Usaka's office vault to get this book that explains how to get past the barriers. It was so well guarded. There has to be something here. The whitish blue-haired kitsune began to flip through the ancient book that he had stolen in anger as the fallen angel that in his arrogance he saw as his lesser berated him. Useless. The three-tailed kitsune, Mizuki, looked down at his stomach as he felt searing pain surge through his body. Dropping the book he had been searching through, panic surged through him as he saw a light spear piercing through his torso, a fatal wound. What? I have Lord Kakabiel's protection. Blood spurted out of his mouth as he talked. The traitor looked up at his attacker, seeing the savage smirk on Seiken's face. You really are stupid, aren't you? Lord Kakabiel only told you that you had his protection in order to get you to give us your Yokai secrets. You are too weak and worthless to our lord's plans. You were only kept around long enough to get us here, and it seems like even then you truly had nothing to offer. What a waste of space. Pushing the light spear further into the kitsune's body, Seiken got in close to Mizuka's ears. Lord Kakabiel was going to have you killed as soon as we returned with this temple's treasures, but considering there isn't actually anything here despite your claims, I doubt he will care if I cut you down now. In fact, he might be happy that I eliminated such an annoyance who dared to waste his time. Seiken, are you quite done with that weakling? Finish him off already and grab the book, it still might be of some value, besides I can't hear any fighting outside anymore, our pursuers may be close. Kidomaru, growing impatient yet eager for a fight. With a wet squelch, the fallen angel yanked the spear of light from the kitsune's stomach as blood poured out of the gaping hole, snatching up the old worn book as Mizuka's body collapsed on the floor. Seiken dismissed his spear before looking towards the entrance, where he saw the three pursuers enter and move towards them. The group of devils and yokai came into the large foyer area of the temple, where they could see the intruders right as the three-tailed kitsune's body hit the floor. Yasaka found herself both frustrated and satisfied as the renegade yokai was killed. The traitor was going to die no matter what, and yet it was unfortunate that she was unable to have him interrogated to find out what secrets he may have spilled. Her eyes grew furious as a growl tore from her throat as she saw the journal that the fallen angel picked up from the ground that would most likely explain how they were able to get past the temple security, how random Three Tails Kitsune was able to abscond with a book that she knew was kept in her personal highest security vault would have to be looked into. She also needed to get that book back. Written by her great-granduncle, it was one of the most comprehensive and controversial texts written about the study of the temples, seals in particular. Her ancient relation was a rather interesting individual, yet not the most approved of by the rest of the family. He had researched and petitioned for the complete destruction of the temple seals for years. Believing that the yokai faction should reveal the temples to the world and show them off as a sort of tourist attraction, his ideas were obviously shot down. Despite having his goal denied, her great-granduncle still spent a large amount of time studying the temple seals, and it showed in his personal journal. It was filled with instructions and theories on how to dismantle the various seals surrounding the temples. They were never tested or proven to work, but given the current predicament, his research and knowledge of seals must have been significantly more advanced than what many people gave him credit for. Well, would you look at that, Yukin, Kidomaru, the head yokai, and two of the devil kings. I never expected that our pursuers were the crimson-haired clown of destruction, the pink magical perv, and the mangy demoness of Kyoto. Hahaha, no wonder Taiya failed to stop you, with his hair covering his right eye. The eight-winged Fulin smirked at the group of two devils and one yokai that he had just insulted. Surziches, Seraphol, and Yusaka each bristled at the nicknames that the androgynous fallen angel addressed them as, with each of the three being well known as extremely powerful beings. It wasn't often that people mocked them or treated them with disrespect, even most of their enemies. When you were on top of the metaphorical food chain, people tended to keep any insults they had to themselves in fear of being erased. Apparently this fallen angel was not the type. Wah. Not a pervert. A magical girl. Seraphol yelled at the fallen, stomping her feet like a child. Magical girls always end up in pervy situations. I can't help it if a crazy sex-addicted tentacle monster breaks into my bedroom and uses my body like a toy. It just happens. Everyone else in the temple looked at the female Satan with matching deadpan looks, not believing her for a second. Yusaka wondered if there was perhaps something wrong with her companion, while a small repressed part of her wondered what tentacle sex would feel like. Seiken, Yukin, and Kidomaru each remembered Kakabiel, mentioning how insane the Leviathan was. And while Surziches cared a lot for his fellow Devil King, he couldn't help but sigh, knowing that in filming multiple episodes of her Miracle Leviathan TV show, she actually had let a tentacle monster have its way with her body more than once. Quickly forming a spear of light each, the three fallen angels attempted to strike first, while the devils and Kitsune were distracted. Unfortunately for them, one did not reach the prestige and pinnacle of power to become a Satan or the leader of the yokai without having excellent combat awareness. The light spears thrown by the fallen were quite easily blocked by two magic barriers and one Yujutsu barrier. Blocking the attacks thrown at her, Yusaka sought to gather some answers from the fallen angels, especially now that the traitor was dead and could not be questioned. Tell me, why have you broken into this sacred temple? The yokai faction already has a strained relationship with the Grigori. This offense will only worsen that. I have met with Azazel Dono multiple times, and he has stated his efforts to build a better relationship between our two factions. I highly doubt that he would have sanctioned this unless you don't answer to him anymore. Hahaha. Of course, we don't work for that fool. Lord Kakabiel is the only one worthy to lead the Grigori. It is through him that the superior race, the fallen angels, will rise to rule the world and be rid of you demon filth. The androgynous fallen that insulted them before didn't seem to care that he was spilling information to the blonde yokai as he laughed insanely. Yasaka, Surziches, and Seraphil were actually surprised when as soon as the blue-haired fallen finished his statement, he rushed towards them in a blitz with his twin fallen following close behind, with the fallen angel rank's most common and seemingly universally preferred combat style being mid to long-range attacks. It was quite surprising when they instead rushed to close-range combat. Forming crackling gauntlets of light around their hands and feet, having even numbers between the two sides, caused 3 one-on-one battles to break out in the temple great room. Yasaka vs Aiken. While she may not have been known for her hand-to-hand combat, Yasaka, or rather her parents had made it a point for her to at least be competent in physical combat, she did not particularly like to engage opponents in close range, preferring to use foxfire and other mid-range abilities, however. She was grateful for the harsh taijutsu training that the old turtle yokai Might Guy had taught her in her youth. Engaging in a fast-moving fight, Yasaka quickly realized that she was outmatched, her skills had clearly gone rusty, and her large breasts seemed to hinder her movements more than she ever remembered. Clearly, on the defensive, the kitsune was at least saved from suffering too many blows, as the fallen angel was partially distracted by her bouncing chest. His technique however still left her suffering a few hits that were absorbed by a light application of Tauki, though with each strike that he delivered, it seemed like she was getting hit more than once. Focusing on his strikes, she was able to see that each attack was actually enhanced by his light gauntlets, allowing him to strike multiple times with every punch or kick. Their exchange would have continued for some time, however realizing that she would eventually lose, Yasaka began tapping into more of her Tauki and a little bit of Senjutsu to enhance her body. With her increased speed, strength, and damage resistance, the beautiful blonde was able to reverse the tide of the fight and put the fallen on the defensive with her rough hand-to-hand skills, Tauki, Senjutsu, and the boost that she had from being in such close proximity to the Lee line that ran under the temple. Yasaka was able to push the fallen back and deliver a heavy strike to his abdomen that launched him back multiple feet and left him coughing up a bit of blood. Being connected to the Lee lines prevented her from feeling any of the effects of the temple's limiting seals, and even with her enemy having greater close-range combat skills, she was still much stronger than the 8-winged fallen. You filthy animal. How dare you stand in the way of Lord Kakabiel's rightful conquest? The seemingly perpetually angry man had to dodge a ball of foxfire, as the distance that Yasaka had created was enough for her to engage her enemy with her preferred combat technique. "DCH, I guess I'll have to use this little trinket if I'm going to take your head." Reaching for his neck, he grabbed and tugged a small charm in the shape of a demon mask with a large extended left horn off of his red beaded necklace. Trying to stop him from using what was undoubtedly a cursed seal, Yasaka sent numerous blasts of kitsune foxfire at him. However, given her position on the ground and his ability to fly, he dodged the attacks by flying through the air. With a smirk on his face, the androgynous man jabbed the demon mask bauble into his chest. It quickly melted and sunk into his body, where a deep red hue began to spread across his flesh. Releasing a large gasp, Seiken clenched his muscles as his body was flooded with a large gush of tainted power. Yasaka cursed under her breath as she saw the transformation beginning. She had attempted to prevent the man from using the cursed seal, yet with how easy it was for the dark power to be unleashed, she was not fast enough to prevent him from using it. As the transformation continued, she began to take in more Senjutsu energy and power from the Lee line. Having seen the significant increase in the previous female fallen strength, she knew that she would need to be on her guard. When the now deceased 6-winged fallen angel had used the evil seal, she had jumped up to a low ultimate class level of power. Now facing an 8-winged fallen using the same unnatural power, it was possible that he could ascend to a high ultimate class or even higher. The transformation continued, and his body shifted as it unleashed a dark black miasma. His entire body was covered in a red tint as his face elongated with his chin jutting out into a sharp point and a long horn jutted out of the left side of his skull. His eyes filled with black other than a small pupil, and his lower canine teeth sharpened and grew up over his lips. The right side of his body began to turn a dark gray as scales grew out of his flesh. They continued to grow until his entire right arm and leg were coated in a layer of thick protective scales with barbed points near each joint and 3 large spikes sticking up from his shoulder reminiscent of a pauldron. Alongside his physical transformation, his power level also increased. It was difficult to tell what his current strength was due to the violent nature of the energy he was now releasing. However, Yasaka believed that he was around her own level of strength without tapping into the Lee lines. The demented fallen disappeared in a burst of speed before suddenly appearing behind the Kyubi, slamming his heavily armored right fist into her Tauki and Senjutsu enhanced body. Despite these enhancements, the blow was still strong enough to nearly push the busty blonde off of her feet as she stumbled forward a few steps. As she recovered from the strike, she could hear the demented laughs of the fallen as he flexed his arms and took in the changes that had overtaken his body. As he moved once again, leaving behind an afterimage, Yasaka moved as well, engaging him in a high-speed fight. His physically enhanced strength and twisted light gauntlets clashed with the Yake Stauki, Senjutsu, and Foxfire-coated hands. The eight-winged fallen's speed was too great for Yasaka to avoid, forcing her into a duel of fists and kicks. Only her own physical enhancements and connection to the Lee lines preventing her from getting dominated by the superior hand-to-hand combatant as the two went back and forth with one intent on slaughter and the other delaying until she could receive some help from the devils. Scuffs and bruises began to form on each of their bodies. Surziches vs Kidomaru. Unlike the two blue-haired twins, Kidomaru remained a decent distance away from Surziches, hovering in the air with his wings splayed behind him. This game should be quite the challenge. This might even be considered a boss fight in this little game. I'm actually quite tempted to try and face you with just my normal abilities, however. I feel like I ought to at least try out the power-up that I was given before taking this mission. Reaching into his pocket, the dark-skinned male pulled out a small spider-shaped object. With how much work that insane priest was putting into these things, it must be something incredible. I have to try it. Hahaha. I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy this. Surziches, seeing that his opponent was about to use what he believed was a cursed seal, based on its dark energy signature, launched a large sphere of his power of destruction at the floating man, hoping to end the fight before he used the dark power. Just as the powerful red and black miasma that was the Bale family's signature ability was about to strike the dark-skinned fallen angel, he jabbed the spider talisman into his chest. Right before the power of destruction slammed into his chest, Kidomaru laughed hysterically as he felt dark power course through his veins, burning black and red flame marks crawled across his body. It burned, but yet at the same time, he felt stronger than he ever had before. With a flash of light, the attack struck and obscured any view of the fallen angel. At the same time, a scream ripped itself out of his throat as the smoke from the devil's attack began to dissipate. Kidomaru's scream shifted to laughter as his newly changed form was revealed. Floating in the air was an odd sight. The fallen angel's entire form was coated in a dull gold coating, similar in appearance to that of a cocoon or a mummy wrap. Unlike in most situations where the power of destruction left behind no trace of those unfortunate enough to suffer its obliterating bite, there was no sign of the target suffering any damage at all, which stunned Surziches. Fissures leaking black smoke appeared on the surface of the dull material, and with the sound of shattering pottery, the immensely strong material that evidently could even block the power of destruction, broke off of the now heavily changed Kidomaru and fell to the floor before melting away. The dark-skinned fallen angel's entire body was changed, taking on a demonic appearance. 3 sets of arms hung off of his frame, each having sharp protrusions jutting out at the joints, and his muscles had increased in size, giving him a bulkier appearance. His face was nearly unrecognizable, having taken on a bestial shape. Sharp teeth lined his mouth. He now had 3 eyes which were filled with a tar-black void and a small pupil, the third eye resting in the middle of his forehead. Pointing up from his forehead were 2 horns that pointed slightly to the side, with his formerly black hair paling to a dirty gray and growing in size to form a large bushy spike of hair sticking from the back of his head. The black miasma wicked off of his form as he experimentally moved his now 6 arms, and his power increased and took on a sickening nature that blackened the air around him. Reveling in his new power and intoxicated by the drug-like high that it was delivering to him, he grinned furiously while summoning 6 light spears, 1 in each hand. Haha, now this is more like it. A truly worthy power-up to face the final boss. Die. Launching the jagged weapons and creating more, one after another, creating a continuous volley, the fallen laughed as he rained death down on his enemy. The temple's floor was peppered with small holes and burn marks as Surziches dodged and destroyed the barrage of spears that were hurled down at him from the 6-armed man. As a usually more strategic fighter, the Crimson Satan realized that the ancient seals surrounding the temple were limiting his abilities to a much higher degree than he expected. His attacks were weaker and smaller. And his reserves drained at a rapid rate. Even the devastating effect of the power of destruction was limited, doing significantly less damage. Surziches gave up on the idea of destroying the barrage of spears and decided to dodge the attacks. Surely the fallen angel would run out of energy or succumb to the poisonous effect of the cursed seals sooner or later. As he maneuvered around the most recent spear bombardment, the crimson-haired devil paused as he felt something off. Looking down at his leg, his eyes widened slightly as he saw a slight cut in his pants and felt the unmistakable burn of light enter his body. He knew that not a single spear had managed to strike him, so what happened? Dodging yet another of the continuous projectiles, he once again was surprised when a slice appeared on his left arm. With widened eyes, he finally realized what was causing his injuries. Minuscule, nearly invisible strings of light surrounded him in a weave, and he had been hitting them while dodging. Ahaha. So you finally realize you are caught in my web of light. Each of my spears is merely a conduit through which to extend my net, and now you are trapped within it. Ah, the praise I shall receive from Lord Kakabiel for slaying the devil Lucifer. Ha ha ha. The dark-skinned fallen angel laughed as a dark miasma began to radiate off of his body. Xerxes was actually surprised and impressed by the ingenuity the Fallen displayed with this attack. It was a truly unique and potentially deadly ability that would be difficult to work around. The crimson-haired devil realized that he was actually quite lucky to only have a few light cuts across his body, as it was possible that he could have lost a wing or been sliced in half if he had made one wrong move. Shit, if the temple seals weren't limiting my power, this would have been a much different fight, but he has me in a trap now. Running through his options, Xerxes knew he had to do something to destroy or escape the light web he was now surrounded by. Fortunately, there was still a manageable amount of space to move in, but it greatly limited his dodging capabilities, and if he remained stuck for too long, the fallen angel could simply use his abilities to continually tighten the web around him. Blocking the next spear that headed his way, Xerxes made sure to destroy it instead of allowing himself to be further trapped by more light wires. As he continued to burn through his limited reserves, he took every opportunity to examine the area around him to try and find a weakness he could exploit. He was surrounded by thin light wires with no visible route of escape, and while he noticed that the fallen angel's skin was beginning to grow darker with each minute, a possible sign of the cursed seal's poison working its way through his system, the man still appeared fresh. Deciding that his only option at this point was to break out of the web that he was trapped in, the Crimson Satan formed a short sword out of the power of destruction, swinging the small energy blade like a machete, chopping through rainforest vines. Xerxes moved through the intertwining lines of light, yet with each swing, it seemed like he made little to no progress. Cursing to himself and dodging to the side, he barely avoided a set of light spears that had gotten through his guard while he focused on freeing himself. Trying to run won't help you, devil. Once you are in my web, you are my prey, and prey gets devoured. Continuing to throw spears like wild, the fallen angel added more and more layers to his trap, showing that even with the seal's influence affecting him, that he still had a great mind for strategy. Making use of a large number of smaller than normal spears to create a thick and treacherous cocoon around the crimson-haired man, while using limited amounts of his own power. However, it was with the most recent volley of spears that Xerxes was able to see the opening he needed. He had wondered how the web of light was capable of remaining long after the light spears that spread them had vanished. For magic, Yujutsu, holy magic, demonic magic, and really any type of energy-based projectiles, the decay rate once it left the caster's control was quite rapid. Once a fallen angel threw their spear of light, it would gradually disperse after either traveling a certain distance or existing for a certain period of time. They were not permanent weapons that remained littered on the battlefield long after the fighting was over, only if a fallen or a pure angel held onto their spear, consistently re-energizing it with more light. Would it remain for longer than perhaps a minute at most? The dark-skinned fallen had to have been connected to the thread somehow for them to remain strung across the temple interior. Once that thought clicked into his mind, Xerxes knew where to look, and he found the answer. Well, it was hard to see. Each thread that made up a part of the deadly web remained connected to his body, like a puppet master holding the strings. With a plan in mind, the strongest devil quickly reached out and grabbed a hold of one of the light threads, ignoring the corrosive light's burn, channeling a large amount of the power of destruction through his hand, and to the string he smirked lightly as he saw his plan work. The light string was quickly destroyed by the Bale family's signature ability, and as it was obliterated, the demonic power flowed up the thread's length, all the way to where it connected to the fallen angel's body. With a scream of both anguish and rage, the six-armed man howled in pain as the power of destruction quickly ripped away at his body. Despite the enhanced powers of the cursed seal, attempting to resist the disintegrating effects of the crimson-haired devil's attack quickly worked its way into Kadamra's unknowingly weakening body. Much like the many previous victims of the power of destruction, the eight-winged fallen angel was quickly obliterated, leaving Xerxes to sigh in relief before he winced. Partially due to the sizzle of the light burns, and more so due to how angry his wife Graphia would be that he ruined his expensive suit, while he took a moment to breathe, a deafeningly loud scream echoed across the temple chamber, drawing his eyes over to the far side of the room. Seraphol vs Yukin. As opposed to Yusaka, who had at least moderate-level hand-to-hand combat skills, Seraphol was never much of a close-range combatant, preferring long-range magic casting. She had of course throughout her life learned some hand-to-hand combat skills, but they were admittedly rusty and not much of a match for the blue-haired man's light gauntlet-enhanced physical combat talents. Unlike his twin, Yukin was not as skilled in hand-to-hand combat, yet he was still much better than the female Satan who chose to fly into the air and try to gain some distance to launch her attacks. Quickly following her, the two began a long aerial chase around the temple, which was only broken up by the occasional icicle or light spear. The two combatants continued on their chase, with the fallen angel growing increasingly frustrated as the devil continued to lead him on a loop around the air. The aerial pursuit came to an abrupt ending however, when Yukon suddenly lost all of the air from his lungs and collapsed onto the ground. He wheezed for breath as a crimson-red glow came from inside his pocket. With a gurgle he choked on a rush of air as an external power forced its way into his body. Inside his pocket sat a small red demon mask jewel, nearly identical to that of his twin Seiken's, with an elongated right horn instead of his brother's left. Yukon felt his body scream in pain as he quickly looked over at his brother who was fighting the Yokai leader. Seeing the demonic form that his brother took on, he knew that he was using the cursed seal that they had been given before taking on this mission. What Yukon did not know however was that much like their twin connection and near identical appearance, their individual cursed seals also shared a purposefully included link. The seals given to Kidomaru and Taiya were unique to them, yet Seiken and Yukon's seals were identical, other than their physical appearance, as a new and largely untested experiment. Alper wished to see how the seals worked in the real world and how the dark energy affected the wielder. Something that he had discovered in his early testing was that each person would react to the energy differently and it would need to be adjusted to each wielder. As unwitting disposable pawns to the fallen angel cadre, Kakabiel, Seiken and Yukon were given identical cursed seals, meant to study how two near-identical twins would react when using linked and matching seals, with one having free access to the corrosive power without the downsides and the other being subjected to all of the negative effects. Now as Seiken freely used the cursed seal's tainted power with seemingly zero drawbacks, he was unknowingly subjecting his twin to unimaginable levels of pain as the poisonous effects of the evil energy was forcibly injected into Yukon's normal unempowered body. Dread began to overtake Yukon's body, much like his twin, yet as it spread it began to puff up under his skin, swelling and stretching his flesh in a large number of lumps. His breathing grew rapid as the pain of not only his own unused cursed seal and his brother's currently in use mark struck him all at once, his mouth open in a silent scream as he began to writhe on the floor. Seraphol watched with mixed feelings as the formerly quite strong man was reduced to a deformed mess, with black foam dribbling from his lips. Her lips dipped into a frown as the man began to shake wildly before retching and vomiting up a large pool of thick tar black fluid onto the temple floor next to him. She hovered down to the ground with a slight sadness in her eyes as the horror of the cursed seals was exhibited to her once again. She didn't know for sure why the man was suffering so much when he had not even used the evil token, yet it was clear that he would not be receiving a power-up, only death. With another loud retch, the fallen angel's throat bulged and multiple organs were forcibly ejected from his body onto the floor. Unlike healthy-looking organs, the ones his body expelled were covered in black tumors and looked like they were deformed and ripped right out of his body by the force of his regurgitation. The pile of guts and blood bubbled on the floor as if being eaten by acid, while the light in the blue-haired man's eyes was slowly consumed by inky darkness. With wheezing and gurgling breaths, the fallen angel looked up at the Satan that stood a few feet away from him, attempting yet barely managing to lift his arm towards her. "Kai, kill me." The abrupt change from a healthy and strong opponent to a man begging for death was shocking, yet given his state Seraphol could easily realize why he was now desperate for a release from the pain. As the man released another gush of black fluid from his mouth, the female Satan molded an ice lance, which quickly shot forth and pierced the man's chest, striking his heart and hopefully putting a faster end to his suffering. Despite having killed many beings over the years, the relieved look in his near-dead eyes made the feeling of her kill significantly more impactful than any of the rest. Tearing his eyes away from his opponent, Seiken watched with wide eyes as his twin was slain by the pink Satan, his mind not taking into account the large pool of dark liquid and organs bubbling on the floor, enhanced by the dark energy of the cursed seal flowing through him. The fallen unleashed a rage-fueled scream. Yukon. His enhanced anger was so palpable that it released a burst of dark energy in a sound wave that disoriented the devils, and especially the kitsune who had heightened hearing. While they recovered from the deafening and dizzying scream, the red-skinned man charged at a high rate of speed toward Seraphol, abandoning his own fight to try and take revenge on his twin's killer. Summoning a large and jagged spear which he intended to ram through her body. The Leviathan only had time to shake off the nausea brought on by the loud scream and blink before the enraged demonic-looking man was nearly on top of her, with a jagged-looking black spear of light poised to skewer her through the chest. His black sclera eyes glared hatefully at the staff-wielding girl, with his large fang-like teeth grit in a furious snarl. Quickly summoning up some of her magic, Seraphol created a shield of ice around her staff and held it in front of her body. With the limited time she had to recover and brace herself for the attack, as well as the temple seals limiting her power, she somehow actually managed to create a decently strong defense, which caused the fallen spear to glance off of the side of the shield. Unfortunately, she didn't make it out unscathed as the tip of the spear glanced off of the side of her stomach, leaving a slight bleeding gash. deflecting off of the shield created by the pink Satan with his rage and cursed seal-fueled speed, making him appear as a blur. The monstrous form of the fallen angel continued forward, captured by his momentum, leading the deflected spear charge to slam directly into the side of the statue. The speed of his movement and the dark twisted power of his blacklight spear actually pierced the body of the ancient statue, plunging nearly 4 feet of corrupted energy into the large yokai figure, with its jagged edges getting caught inside the tan effigy. With his mind clouded by fury and the corrosive taint of the rotten seal's energy, the pale red-skinned figure did not even think to discard his weapon and create a new one. Instead, he tugged on the stuck weapon before finally dislodging it with a harsh tug. As he prepared once again to attack the devil woman who killed his brother, a sound similar to that of a raging waterfall made him pause and look at the statue that the sound was coming from. As the 4 remaining individuals each looked toward the large sculpture, sand began to pour out from the jagged hole pierced into the side of the giant Tanuki statue, forming a waterfall of granular particles that rained down onto the temple floor. As the sand hit the rough flooring, a loud bell-like gong echoed throughout the chamber, drawing all the occupants' attention. The small hole began to crack as more and more sand began to push itself out of the statue. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, a loud and gleeful voice rang all around them, and a powerful presence flared to life. Finally. Ha 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 ha. Imawakyahu. The great one-tailed Tanuki Shukaku has returned. Jahaha. Standing on guard, the devils and even the remaining fallen angel looked warily around, eyeing each other and the giant statue. Isaka stood frozen in shock as the powerful chakra presence washed over her. The voice, could the ancient Shukaku-sama truly be alive and now awakened? For centuries the yokai had worshipped the statues hidden inside the temples, believing them to be depictions of ancient yokai gods or perhaps the very first yokai. There were children's books written featuring the temple statues that had been used to inspire or teach yokai children. There were books such as Shukaku's Lullaby, Chime's Lucky Lunchtime Snack, Kurama Says It's Nap Time, and many more. One particular book written by an elder toad yokai from her grandfather's time, named Gamameru, told the tale of the statues one day releasing the ancient beings so they could walk among the modern-day yokai and protect them. It was a very popular book with children. Even Yasaka, when she was a child, loved the book, however. That was all that it was, a children's book meant to honor the statues and give children a sense of security and hope in a dark world. Isaka never believed that the temples actually housed living beings inside of them, but this voice, this power, there was no way she could deny what was happening. The temple shook and rumbled as more of the statue cracked, sand burst forth from various fissures that had opened up around the temple. The tan grains began to layer the floor of the temple, with the level rising with every passing second. Ugh, more sand. I don't like sand, it's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. I'll be dumping sand out of my socks for months. I don't envy your tails and ears right now, Yasaka Dono. The crimson Satan glared proudly at the rising sand. Ooh-oh. Lucky. I'm the first one awake. It's time to wake up, you sleepyheads. Ha-ha-ha, the loud and almost crazy sounding voice shouted before laughing wildly. With a final laugh, the statue crumbled away to nothing other than coarse grains. Below the layer of sand that now covered the floor, a massive glowing blue seal circle lit up and began to spin in a clockwise rotation. What is happening? Seraphil yelled, the very thought that was traveling through the minds of everyone inside the temple as she hovered in the air. The ceiling of the temple was the next thing to turn to sand, raining down onto the shocked temple occupants. With the roof of the temple gone and the walls beginning to crumble from the top down, the desert sky became visible to them. However, it wasn't the same as it was when they entered the temple. The dry winds of the Sahara began to increase in speed, picking up granules that formed a sandstorm around the temple. The pulse of power radiated from the floor of the temple as a glowing blue seal circle rose up from beneath the sand and began to spin clockwise on the surface, and the wind around the temple picked up even more speed and began to form a funnel cone around the temple. Following the seal's rotation, the now sand floor began to spin as well, dragging along with it the body of Yukin, Mizuki. Then the ancient yokai journal, a powerful pulling force, began to tug on the devils, fallen angel, and Kitsune as the center of the room dropped down, forming a whirlpool of sand. Isaka, being unable to fly, was the first to feel the effects of the swirling sand. Despite trying to move out of the sand pit, the wind, sand whirlpool, and an invisible force continued to pull her body toward the center, even manifesting one of her large fox-form paws to grip one of the few remaining temple walls, did not slow her descent, stretching her arm and causing her grip to grow weaker. The 2 devils and 1 fallen angel, despite having the advantage of flight, still found it hard to resist the invisible force that was pulling them. Forcing their wings to fly higher brought no results, almost as if a powerful gravitational pull was sucking them down to the earth. Isaka was the first to get pulled into the whirling sand with a startled scream. While fighting to stay in the air, the 3 flying beings watched in shock as the Kitsune vanished into the depths. What bullshit is this? "What did you do?" Filthy screaming in mad rage, the cursed seal-empowered Seiken was too focused on flying and getting revenge for the death of his brother that he didn't notice a large chunk of still solid sand wall fall and bash him in the head, his previous injuries, the taxing and poisoning nature of the cursed seal. And the knock to the head were too much for the eight-winged fallen angel to take and he passed out, his body quickly fell from the air and was subsequently dragged under the sand. Zetch's Tan. What do we do? I can't get away and teleport magic won't work. As the Leviathan continued to struggle against the pull of the sand whirlpool, a look of horror grew on her face as her staff was tugged away from her. No. My magic staff. Completely disregarding her own safety and any semblance of rational sanity, Serful dove down into the sand in an effort to save her favorite magical girl's staff. Serziches watched his fellow Satan disappear beneath the surface with a now all too common deadpan look on his face. The whirlpool continued to pull on the red-haired man, and despite every attempt to fly away from it, he was pulled closer and closer. The current Lucifer found himself shocked as he tried to enter his human-shaped aura of destruction form, but found himself unable to. During the previous conflict, he had found Yusaka's words concerning the temple, limiting those of high power to be true, however. He did not imagine that one of his strongest abilities would be completely unusable. As the gravitational pull began to grow stronger, Serziches quickly found his foot to be touching the sand beneath him, having run through all of the options in his head and realizing that nothing would be able to pull him away from this whirlpool, he sighed before allowing himself to fall into the swirling grains. After the whirlpool sucked up the devil Lucifer, a beam of sandy yellow energy ripped through the sky, lighting up the desert with its glow. As it pierced the clouds, the beam began to disperse from the top down, and once the energy beam dissipated at ground level, the sandstorm and whirling grains returned to normal. Left behind where the temple once stood was nothing but sand. All evidence of the former structure erased. Across the world. All across the world, supernatural beings with a view of the earth, from the lowliest reincarnated devil to the archangel Michael, and even the various gods and office itself, turned their sights to the large desert of the Sahara. The beam of light streaking into the air above lit up the sky and dominated their senses. Humans, those that were not knowledgeable of the supernatural, were the only beings on the earth to be unable to see the light or feel its power. However, lab equipment and scientific instruments lit up with readings that would throw the human governments into a panic. The strange phenomenon caused uproar not only in the human world but in the supernatural as well, with each faction trying to investigate the cause and scramble their forces in case it was a declaration of a new war. The Yokai faction and any Yokai that existed outside of the faction itself were the ones to feel the most significant impact of the energy burst. They did not know what it was, but they knew that it was chakra, a lot of chakra, and that something had awoken. Already panicking and looking for who to blame, the supernatural world leaders were unprepared for what was happening and what would happen next. The temples have been built and the seals are in place. With them, we will be sealed away, apart, but always connected to one another. With time our energy will be drawn upon, and life of all forms will return to flourish. Shukaku, Matatabi, Isobu, Son Goku, Kakuo, Seiken, Jimei, Jaiwuki, and Kurama. A time will come when the seal is broken, and the world will have need of us once more. Until then, my friends, know my family. A pulse of power emanated from the speaker's forehead, where a third eye rested. Chakra-enhanced stone formed over the speaker's face before crawling down the rest of their body, locking it in a state of eternal slumber, waiting to be called upon and awoken to the world once more. Turkmenistan Darvaza gas crater. The large natural gas field in the modern-day country of Turkmenistan had been a problem for the many humans who wished to mine its valuable natural gas deposits. After a mishap, the field had been permanently on fire for many years, earning itself the title of Door to Hell. The normal red and orange-hued flames had burned for over 40 years, and it was expected to keep burning for many more years to come. However, what the human researchers were not expecting was for the flames to suddenly change to a brilliant blue. Deep under the earth, directly below the crater, was a large cavern hidden by the ancient seals that surrounded it. The cavern appeared quite natural looking, other than the large statue that occupied its center, and the constantly burning blue flames that cast an ethereal glow around the chamber. The large stone sculpture that had stood for longer than anyone knew depicted a colossal two-tailed cat standing proud. Suddenly a shimmer of sandy yellow energy began to illuminate a large seal that took up the entire floor of the cavern. The seal possessed the kanji for 1 through 10, and upon its illumination, the marking for 1 glowed and pulsed at a steady beat. But the seal illuminated and in an active state the temple began to shake as a large power began to flow out of the statue. The blue flames surrounding the cavern grew in intensity, and the stone Nico statue began to smoke. From inside the earthen capsule, a bright blue glow increased in intensity before the entire statue burned into nothing but ash in an azure inferno. The unleashed flames began to spin, matching the rotation of the now moving seal, before they were drawn down into the large matrix. After all of these years, it seems we have been called upon, the kitten seal has finally been released, and we shall all return to this world once more. The spinning seal absorbed all of the cobalt fire before releasing a brilliant blue beam through the earth high into the sky, echoing with the sound of a cat's yowl. Up on the surface without warning, the large crater of flames grew in intensity as scorching hot blue fire burst out of the pit. The small research and observation team that was stationed nearby screamed and ran as quickly as they could away from the crater as the inferno burned at their flesh. Emergency signals were sent out even as those who were able to run away as fast as they could suffered third-degree burns. Australia Coral Coast. Deep beneath the ocean waters off the coast of Australia, a great bed of coral sat as fish and sea creatures swam by hurriedly, as if afraid of something unseen. A faint shimmer of sandy gold and brilliant blue energy trickled down from the surface of the ocean, like a drop of food coloring, sinking to the deep depths before disappearing into the coral below. Managing to filter through the surface of the ocean floor, the occasional water droplet dripped down into the large chamber that sat hidden beneath the bedrock. Coral and small ponds littered the underwater cave as a light gray glow given off by some of the bioluminescent coral and seaweed dimly illuminated the chamber and cast a dull light onto the large statue that sat in the center. The statue was massive. The creature depicted a strange combination between a turtle, crab, and shrimp. Its large shell and armor-covered body towered over the empty space as its three shrimp-like tails curled up behind its back. Coral and various barnacles spread sporadically across the surface of the statue, flourishing with life and growth. As the two streaks of color began their descent to the cave floor, they made contact with the rocky ground. As a large seal activated, the kanji for 1 and 2 began to pulse with sandy gold and cobalt blue light, the seal slowly beginning to rotate as the cavern shook and rumbled. The coral, barnacles, and seaweed that sat around the chamber began to grow rapidly, spreading around the room as water began to fill the pools and begin flooding the chamber. The large statue groaned as cracks formed on its surface before with a large thump, it collapsed into pieces that each began to turn into even more coral once they touched the ground. From inside the former statue, a rush of slightly gray water splashed against the cavern floor before it began flowing and matching the seal's rotation in a swirl before being drawn into the complex network of lines that made up the ancient seal. That's odd. Did something go wrong with the seal? It feels like I have slept for much longer than anticipated, troubling, yet it was a nice nap. The gray tinted water disappeared into the spinning seal, and with a final rumble a beam of gray light launched itself upwards, blasting a hole through the ceiling of the cave and through the ocean before it lit up the sky. As the seal disappeared, the crumbling ocean floor gave way to a flood of water that rushed in and submerged that hidden cavern. The ocean surface in response to the beam's passing and underwater collapse grew choppy as large waves began to form, violently rocking any ships that were in the area. Heaven. Lord Michael. There is a third beam of light emanating from off the coast of Australia. Australian church leaders are reporting large waves approaching the land. But the tired sigh, the elegant Archangel Michael massaged his forehead, the toll of maintaining the holy system, leading the angels, and the church bearing down heavily on him. Just like the last two, the chance for damage is great. First a massive sandstorm across the African deserts, then a fiery inferno in Turkmenistan, and now the possibility of tsunamis in Australia. What is happening? Lord Michael. What should we do? The messenger angel that stood before the leader of heaven was already worried by the events that had begun to shake both the human and supernatural world and looked to his leader for answers. Oh, yes, forgive me, I was lost in thought. Send members of the church to assist anyone that may be injured by these phenomena. We do not know what the cause of these events is, so they must remain vigilant. Apologizing to the two-winged angel that stood before him, the seraph gave him what he believed to be the best course of action until more of the situation could be understood. Yes, Lord Michael. Quickly turning to carry out his orders, the messenger angel left after a short bow to his leader. Now alone, Michael sighed once again as his shoulders dropped into a hunched position. Father, I wish you were here to guide me. So friends, that for today, see next video. Thanks for watching.